The trade buzz around the Cleveland Browns just went supernova. In the span of 48 hours, the most chaotic 48 hours of this entire pre-draft cycle, the football world exploded with reports, rumors, predictions, and confirmed blockbusters that have completely reshaped the landscape around Cleveland's quarterback room and their entire approach to the 2026 NFL Draft. The Cincinnati Bengals just landed Dexter Lawrence. The Giants now hold 2 top 10 picks and control the board above Cleveland. ESPN's Jordan Reed confirmed that the Browns are actively looking to trade down from number 6. 3 national draft analysts predicted different trades for Cleveland involving the Cowboys, the Jets, and other teams desperately trying to move up. And in the middle of all of it, in the middle of the chaos, the exploding draft board, the shifting first-round landscape, sits the most important unresolved question in the entire Cleveland Browns universe. What actually happens to Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders? Because right now, in the final 4 days before the 2026 NFL Draft kicks off in Pittsburgh, the answers to those 2 questions, not who Cleveland takes at 6, not what tackle or receiver they land at 24, but what genuinely happens with the 2 quarterbacks at the center of the most contentious, most expensive, most politically loaded depth chart competition in professional football. Those answers will define this franchise more than any single pick in any single draft. And tonight, we're going to answer them. Fully, completely, with every piece of reporting, every financial reality, every insider signal, and every piece of organizational context that you need to understand what is actually coming. Subscribe right now if you want real Cleveland Browns coverage without the spin, because this is the story that decides everything. Let's get into it. To understand what happens to Watson and Sanders, you first have to understand the financial prison the Cleveland Browns are living in. Because the quarterback competition, the open competition, the Watson has a chance, the Shedeur is the frontrunner narratives, all of them exist inside a cage built from one of the worst financial decisions in the history of professional sports. And the cage does not open cleanly. It opens painfully, over years, at enormous cost. And every decision about who starts, who stays, and who goes is filtered through the most complicated cap situation any NFL team has carried in the modern era. The Deshaun Watson trade is now widely regarded as one of the worst transactions in NFL history. Watson was acquired from the Houston Texans in exchange for 3 first-round picks, 2 additional draft picks, and a 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed contract, the largest fully guaranteed contract in NFL history at the time. Browns owner Jimmy Haslam himself called it a big swing and miss in 2025. Wikipedia's swing and a miss. $230 million. 3 first-round picks. The picks that became Will Anderson Jr., Defensive Rookie of the Year in Houston. The picks that became other starters and contributors on a team that went from laughingstock to division winner in the span of 3 years. And in exchange, Cleveland received 19 games of actual football across 4 seasons, 2 torn Achilles tendons, a fractured shoulder, and a quarterback whose numbers have declined every year he has been in Northeast Ohio. Watson will carry an $80.7 million cap hit for 2026, the largest single-player cap number in the history of the NFL. Cleveland's only financially viable path was to restructure his contract again, converting base salary into bonus money that spreads the cap impact across future years. Without the restructure, cutting Watson would have created $131.2 million in dead cap money. After the restructure, a post-June 1 release in 2027 would create $86.2 million in dead money spread across 2027 and 2028. Yahoo Sports $80.7 million on the cap for a player who has not played a full season since 2020. $80.7 million, the largest cap number in the history of the National Football League. For a player whose last meaningful football was played when most of the current Cleveland roster was still in college. This is the financial backdrop against which every conversation about starting quarterbacks, about draft picks, about building a competitive team, and about the futures of both Watson and Sanders must be understood. $80.7 million on the cap for a player who has not played a full season since 2020. $80.7 million. The largest cap number in the history of the National Football League. For a player whose last meaningful football was played when most of the current Cleveland roster was still in college. This is the financial backdrop against which every conversation about starting quarterbacks, about draft picks, about building a competitive team, and about the futures of both Watson and Sanders must be understood. He cannot be traded. He cannot be cut without catastrophic cap consequences. He has a no-trade clause that means he controls whether any deal even gets explored. And he is taking up $80.7 million of cap space that Cleveland could have used to build around a young quarterback, add premium free agents, and create the kind of offensive infrastructure that actually helps young players develop. This is what the Watson era has truly cost Cleveland. Not just the picks, not just the games lost, but the trapped, paralyzed, handcuffed organizational reality of 2026, where the biggest decision on the entire roster is being made not primarily on football merit, but on financial and contractual constraints that eliminate every clean option and leave only difficult, imperfect, consequential ones. So what actually happens to Watson in 2026? The answer requires separating three different questions that the public conversation has been conflating. Does he stay on the roster? Does he compete for the starting job? And does he start week 1? On the first question, does he stay? The answer is almost certainly yes. The Browns are planning to keep Watson on their roster for the 2026 season. This is the last year of his fully guaranteed contract, and releasing him carries financial consequences so severe that keeping him, even at the historic cap number, is the less damaging choice. Yahoo Sports, keeping a player you know you want to move on from because the financial exit is too expensive to execute now, is one of the most demoralizing realities of NFL cap management, and it is exactly the situation Cleveland finds itself in with Watson in 2026. After Watson's contract concludes following the 2026 season, the Browns will have $86.2 million in salary cap charges spread across 2027 and 2028 as dead money. Money paid to a player no longer on the roster, reducing cap space for the next 2 years of roster building. This is the sunk cost that follows the Watson mistake even after he is finally gone. Felon on demand. He stays. He takes up the cap space. He costs the organization flexibility that could have built a better team around whoever the franchise eventually commits to at quarterback. And everyone in the building knows it, including Watson himself. The most generous interpretation of his 2026 presence is that it gives the Browns a veteran backup option if Sanders struggles, a physical insurance policy for a young quarterback room, and a former Pro Bowler whose talent, in whatever form it now exists after 2 Achilles injuries, is at least nominally better than the developmental options behind him on the depth chart. The honest interpretation is that he is there because they have no choice, and the team will spend the season doing its best to extract whatever value remains in a player whose window as a legitimate NFL starter appears to have passed. On the second question, does he compete? The answer is technically yes, but the word compete is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Browns owner Jimmy Haslam said at the NFL owners' meetings that Watson has a great chance to compete for the starting quarterback job, calling this offseason a fresh start for the veteran. Head coach Todd Monken has also declined to commit to Sanders as the unquestioned starter, framing it as an open competition. Heavy sports, an open competition. That phrase, used at every press conference, repeated by every organizational voice, is the specific language that keeps Watson's career in Cleveland nominally viable while avoiding the organizational embarrassment of officially retiring the most expensive mistake in the franchise's history. It is not a lie exactly. Training camp will happen. Reps will be distributed. Monken said himself that the reps will not be evenly distributed, but that every quarterback will have a chance to make their case. Watson will take snaps. He will be evaluated. And if the football genuinely demonstrates that he is the better option, if 2 Achilles surgeries and 18 months away from the field have somehow not diminished the talent that made him a 3-time Pro Bowler in Houston, then the organization will start him. The probability of that outcome is, based on every available medical, statistical, and football evidence, extremely low. Players coming back from a re-torn Achilles are rarely the same players who left. The position requires quick-twitch movements, precise pocket footwork, the ability to plant and drive the ball that depends entirely on the structural integrity of the Achilles tendon. 2 surgeries on the same tendon, 18 months of rehabilitation, 30 years old. The physical profile of a player returning to elite quarterback play is not encouraging. The former talent was real. The current version is the genuine uncertainty. NFL insider Ian Rapoport, when asked directly who he expects to be the Browns' Week 1 starter, answered, "My guess is Deshaun Watson. When he's been healthy, he's been for sure good enough to be a starter." Rapoport cited Watson's track record and his perceived higher ceiling in a win-now window as the basis for the prediction. Newsweek. Rapoport's prediction was heard, but it was also immediately challenged by virtually every other credible football voice with access to this situation. Analysts on Cleveland's own local radio pointed out that money is not the issue, that the Browns will play whoever gives them a better chance to win, regardless of what Watson's contract says. The sunk cost of the deal does not determine the depth chart. Performance in training camp and the preseason does. Pro Football Network and the performance argument, by every available evidence, favors Sanders. The Atlantic's Zach Jackson wrote that Sanders is stronger than ever the favorite to win the starting job, with Todd Monken expected to give him the first team reps in the spring program based on where the season ended. Barker Monken has said his rep distribution will be based on what we've seen in the past and where the year ended last year. Language that points directly at Sanders, who finished the 2025 season as the starter, who went 3-4 in 7 starts, and who won the last meaningful games of the year against division rivals. On the third question, does Watson start Week 1? This is where the genuine uncertainty lives. And the honest answer, 4 days before the draft, is that nobody outside of the Cleveland Browns coaching staff knows. Not Rapoport, not the local insiders, not the anonymous sources, not the fans. The competition will play out in training camp. The preseason will happen. And Todd Monken, a first-year head coach who was not in the building for any of the Watson experience and who therefore has no emotional investment in defending a mistake he did not make, will make the decision based on what he sees in front of him between May and August. One analyst made the case that even if Watson plays well, starting him creates its own problems. A player who is capable of being a franchise quarterback at 30 is not a long-term solution for a team that needs to rebuild the position, and any success from Watson simply delays the reckoning rather than resolving it. Sports Illustrated. That is the trap. Win with Watson, and you delay the real decision. Lose with Watson, and you have wasted the entire 2026 season on a false hope. Start Sanders and take the development lumps, and you're making the honest, forward-looking choice that at least gives you information about whether the future is in this building or needs to be found elsewhere. The path through this situation is not clean in any direction. It is only more or less honest about the problem being solved. Now we come to Shedeur Sanders. And the question of what happens to him in 2026 is both simpler and more complicated than the Watson question, depending on which lens you use. On the simple level, Sanders stays. He is under contract. He performed well enough in his rookie season to earn the right to continue developing. He holds a cap hit of $45 million in 2026. On paper, the best available quarterback option given Watson's injury history and Gabriel's limitations. While his 2022 trade was a failure for Cleveland, the hard truth is that the Browns do not have a definitively better answer to play in 2026. Pro Football Network, he is not going anywhere. The number 2 jersey is on order. The competition is scheduled. The coaching staff has expressed genuine enthusiasm about his development. On the complicated level, the one that requires engaging with the full organizational reality rather than the press conference version, Sanders is fighting a battle that extends far beyond the depth chart. He is fighting the perception created by anonymous sources, fighting the financial logic of an organization that spent $230 million on his direct competitor, fighting insider reports that keep resurfacing with claims designed to undermine his standing, and fighting a media ecosystem that has been shaped by the most powerful people in this situation to serve narratives that do not always align with his interests. But here is what the complicated level also contains. The genuine football evidence. The actual plays. The actual moments. The back-to-back wins against Rodgers and Burrow. the 364-yard game against Tennessee, the first career win against Las Vegas, the Pro Bowl selection as an alternate that nobody outside of Cleveland's most loyal fanbase talks about. Sanders threw for 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions across 7 starts in 2025, completed 56.6% of his passes, and finished with a 3-4 record as a starter, better than any other Cleveland quarterback managed that season. He also added 169 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, showing the mobility that Todd Monken specifically praised after evaluating his film. Newsweek. Those numbers are not elite. They are not the numbers of a proven franchise quarterback, but they are the numbers of a player who survived, genuinely survived, the single worst environment for quarterback development in the entire National Football League in 2025. The worst offensive line, the worst receiver room, 3 different coordinators in 2 years, an owner who publicly admitted he never wanted him there, anonymous sources attacking his character and work ethic, a coaching staff that was fired 2 months after the season ended. He went 3-4 through all of. Sanders said in December 2025, "Nothing is promised going into next year, so I stay in the moment. Stay in what I have to do now to even be here next year." Sports Illustrated. Nothing is promised. Stay in the moment. That is not the language of entitlement. That is not the language of a player who expects things to be handed to him. That is the language of a player who learned, painfully, publicly, with the whole football world watching, that the margin for error in this league is real and that the only sustainable response to that reality is daily accountability to the work. The question for Sanders in 2026 is not whether he is good enough to play in this league. It is whether the environment he plays in is finally good enough to let him show it. And the environment, with the rebuilt offensive line, the draft additions at receiver, the Todd Monken scheme that plays to his strengths, is dramatically better than anything he experienced in 2025. The draft adds another dimension to both futures. Because Andrew Berry's comments at his pre-draft press conference left the door open for a quarterback addition in this draft, not at pick 6, but potentially later. Berry said directly, "I think it's possible that we could add to any position. That's really the truth. And I wouldn't disqualify quarterback." NFL a quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round of this draft changes the room dynamics in a specific way. It does not displace Sanders. It does not solve the Watson situation. What it does is signal organizational uncertainty, a message that says the front office is not yet fully committed to Sanders as the long-term answer, that they want another developmental option in the room, and that the 2027 plan, which multiple insiders have connected to the Arch Manning class, is being actively managed through the current player acquisitions. ESPN's Jordan Reed reported that the Browns are among multiple teams actively looking to trade down in the top 10, with the Cardinals at 3 and Cleveland at 6 both interested in moving back and collecting additional assets. Matt Miller reported hearing from a general manager that there could be as many as 8 trades in the 1st round, with Cleveland specifically among the most likely movers. Yard Barker. If the Browns trade down from 6, collecting picks at 12 or 14 or 16 plus future capital, they arrive at the draft with more ammunition to address multiple needs simultaneously. Receiver at 1 spot, tackle at another, potentially a developmental quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round. The trade-down scenario actually makes the quarterback addition more likely precisely because it creates the flexibility to address multiple positions in the same draft without forcing a decision between receiver and tackle at 1 premium pick. The Dexter Lawrence trade to Cincinnati also reshapes this calculus. Multiple analysts noted in the hours after the Lawrence deal that the most important thing the Browns can do for whoever starts at quarterback in 2026, Watson or Sanders, is fix the offensive line. Dexter Lawrence playing in the AFC North twice a year against Cleveland's tackles means the offensive line is now a genuine emergency, not just a need. Yahoo! If the Browns trade down from 6, collecting picks at 12 or 14 or 16 plus future capital, they arrive at the draft with more ammunition to address multiple needs simultaneously. Receiver at 1 spot, tackle at another, potentially a developmental quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round. The trade-down scenario actually makes the quarterback addition more likely precisely because it creates the flexibility to address multiple positions in the same draft without forcing a decision between receiver and tackle at one premium pick. The Dexter Lawrence trade to Cincinnati also reshapes this calculus. Multiple analysts noted in the hours after the Lawrence deal that the most important thing the Browns can do for whoever starts at quarterback in 2026, Watson or Sanders, is fix the offensive line. Dexter Lawrence playing in the AFC North twice a year against Cleveland's tackles means the offensive line is now a genuine emergency, not just a need. Yahoo! An offensive tackle at 6 or 24 becomes not just a roster move, but a survival decision. Because the protection question now has a name attached to it, Dexter Lawrence, in a Bengals uniform, scheduled to play in Cleveland twice a year for as long as he remains in Cincinnati. Every sack Lawrence gets on whoever is playing quarterback for the Browns represents the cost of not closing the deal on Saturday night. Every pressured incompletion, every third and long created by interior pressure, every drive ended by a strip sack, all of it plays out against the backdrop of a trade that was within reach and slipped away. Let us now project forward from everything we know, the financial reality, the competition dynamics, the draft implications, the Lawrence trade aftermath, and construct the most honest possible picture of what actually happens to Watson and Sanders in 2026 and beyond. For Watson, the 2026 season is almost certainly his last in Cleveland. Following the 2026 campaign, the Browns will be able to release Watson with a post-June 1 designation, finally ending the most expensive mistake in franchise history. After the release, Cleveland will still carry $86.2 million in dead money across 2027 and 2028, but the cap will be manageable enough to begin genuine rebuilding. Sports Illustrated the question is not whether Watson leaves after 2026. He almost certainly does. The question is what role he plays in the meantime. The most likely scenario, based on the totality of the evidence, is that Watson competes genuinely in training camp, performs adequately enough to fuel a legitimate debate, but ultimately loses the starting job to Sanders before Week 1. The gap between a 30-year-old quarterback coming back from 2 Achilles surgeries and a healthy, motivated, improving second-year player with the full backing of the coaching staff is too large to be bridged by reputation alone. Monken said the reps will go based on where last year ended, and last year ended with Sanders as the starter. Watson's best-case scenario is a strong preseason performance that earns him the starting job, followed by a few weeks of solid play that reminds people why the Browns made the move in the first place, followed by an injury that nobody wants but that everyone privately fears is inevitable given what his body has endured. That is not a cynical take. It is the medical reality of what 2 Achilles surgeries and 18 months away from football due to a 30-year-old professional athlete's body. The scenario where Watson stays healthy for 17 games and plays like the 2020 version of himself is not zero probability. But it is not the bet you would make with money that matters. As one analyst put it directly, Watson's cap hit does not determine the depth chart. The money is already spent. The only question is who gives the Browns the best chance to win games. And the honest answer to that question, when Watson's injury history is factored in alongside Sanders' development trajectory, points in one direction. Pro Football Network. For Sanders, the 2026 season is the defining one, not just for his career, though it is certainly that, but for his entire legacy within the Browns organization and in the broader narrative of how this particular chapter of Cleveland football history gets written. He enters the year with a rebuilt offensive line, real receivers coming through the draft, a head coach who has specifically praised his abilities, and the momentum of finishing the previous season as the starter on a team that went 3-4 against real competition in the final weeks. If he seizes it, if he takes the improved environment and produces the kind of football that his college film suggested he was capable of, if he makes the completion rate jump from 56.6% to something in the 63 to 65% range, if he reduces the interceptions while maintaining the explosive plays, if he wins games in the AFC North against the Garrett Nussmeyers and the Kyle Shanahans and the division defenses that will be coming for him, then the story writes itself. Sanders becomes the franchise quarterback. The Watson contract becomes the cautionary tale, with the silver lining of having stayed out of the way long enough for the right player to develop. The 2025 draft fall becomes the origin story. And Cleveland finally, after 41 quarterbacks and 25 years of searching, has its answer. If he struggles, if the turnovers persist, if the completion percentage stays low, if the decision-making under pressure does not improve, then the organization faces a decision in 2027 that nobody in Cleveland wants to contemplate, but that the front office is clearly already preparing for. The 2027 quarterback class. Arch Manning. The next reset. The next hope. This time it's different. Reports have indicated that Browns owner Jimmy Haslam is deeply impressed by Arch Manning, and insiders have suggested the organization is viewing 2027 as a potential reset point at the quarterback position if neither Sanders nor Gabriel proves to be the long-term answer. Cleveland Browns community. That contingency plan is real. It is being actively managed. The 2026 season is not just about winning games. It is a live audition for whether Shedeur Sanders can make the 2027 quarterback conversation irrelevant by making himself undeniable in 2026. The trade buzz that has exploded around Cleveland this week is not just about picks and positions and board dynamics. It is about the full organizational reckoning that is happening in real time. The attempt to build something competitive enough to give whoever plays quarterback a chance to succeed, while simultaneously managing the financial consequences of the worst single decision in franchise history, while simultaneously evaluating whether the young quarterback who survived the 2025 disaster is genuinely capable of leading a winner, while simultaneously absorbing the competitive earthquake of Dexter Lawrence landing in Cincinnati. ESPN confirmed that Cleveland is looking to trade down from number 6 in Thursday's draft, with the Cowboys and Jets among potential trade partners. The Browns are one of multiple teams in the top 10 actively seeking to move back and collect additional capital. Yard Barker, the trade-down strategy, if executed correctly, could actually address both the Watson problem and the Sanders opportunity simultaneously. More picks means more weapons around whoever plays quarterback. More weapons means a better environment for Sanders to develop. A better development environment means a more legitimate evaluation of whether he is the answer. And a more legitimate evaluation means that the 2027 decision, Watson out, new quarterback in, or Sanders extended, gets made with actual information rather than the manufactured noise and anonymous source attacks that have been obscuring the real picture since the day Andrew Berry made the call that changed everything. The trade buzz is real. The Watson decision is real. The Sanders opportunity is real. And all of it, every piece of it, comes to a head in the next 4 days in Pittsburgh and the 6 months of football that follow. For 25 years, Cleveland has been searching for a quarterback. The search has produced 41 different starters. It has produced $230 million in guaranteed money for a player who delivered 19 games. It has produced draft picks, traded away, and cap space squandered in championship windows that never quite opened. And now, in the spring of 2026, the question is sitting right there on the table. The same question it has always been. The same one it will keep being until the answer is found. Who is the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns? The draft starts Thursday. The competition starts in May. The season starts in September. And somewhere between now and then, in training camp, in preseason, in the film rooms and the practice fields, and the moments when a player shows who he really is when the stakes are real, the answer will begin to emerge. Watson knows it might be his last chance. Sanders knows this is his defining moment. And the Browns, the franchise that has been through this more times than any other team in the history of professional football, are about to find out which direction their quarterback future actually points. Everything depends on what happens next. Disclaimer: this content is based on published reports from NFL.com, ESPN, CBS Sports, Yahoo Sports, Newsweek, The Land on Demand, Yard Barker, Pro Football Network, SI.com, Wikipedia, and other credible NFL media sources. Financial figures sourced from overthecap.com via published reports. All quotes are from publicly available press conferences and published articles as of